There we go. All right, live streams. Hello, everybody. Welcome to our November coffee session. I am so excited to have with me David Kennedy from the US Marshals Museum. If you haven't been there yet, that's okay because they haven't quite opened to the public yet. So they're just a few steps ahead of us. So this is going to be a really exciting conversation about museums and how museums kind of grow and develop and can support the work that our law enforcement and first responders do. So for those of you that don't know me, I am Kristy Van Hoven. I am the director at the National EMS Museum. I have a medical history background and have worked at hospital archives, historic sites, and now I get to work here with all your cool stuff. So it's been a fun 3-year journey, and I am so stoked for this conversation. We'll miss Doc tonight, but super happy to talk museums this go around. So I'm going to turn it over to David. David, why don't you give us a little rundown about your early museum life? What got you into this?
What got me into this was after having a long, strange trip, to quote the Grateful Dead, between getting out of high school and getting into the professional world. It was actually on my way to graduate school. I was up in my wife and I just moved into Montana. I just finished my bachelor's. She just finished her tour of service in the Army, where we met. And we were touring around through the Cody Firearms Museum in Cody, Wyoming, as part of the Buffalo Bill, at the time the Historical Center, now the Center of the West. And I stopped and turned to her and said, someday I'm going to be working here. And because I was a gun nerd and I was a history guy and I hadn't really given serious thought to museums. I'm thinking, like, if I'm working there, I'll be working there like 20 years. So I go get my master's degree at Montana State University in Bozeman. And while I'm there, I get involved in a temporary exhibit on weapons that changed the West that was at the University Museum, the Museum of the Rockies there in Bozeman. And as a result of that, I started to realize, between that and realizing that I made my mind up, I didn't want to pursue a doctorate. It's like, museums are a route that I want to go, because I knew I didn't want to go for the doctorate. I didn't want to go for the teacher certificate. And so I end up, a few years later, I ended up putting an application in as the curator at the Cody Firearms Museum. So here I'm thinking 20 years down the road, and it was like 5 years down the road. I'm walking in the front door as the curator. And I think a lot of that was just going from that point. I was in Cody for about 6 years, realized I was tired of being just the gun guy. I wanted to have a more well-rounded experience. I ended up finding, through a number of friends of mine, this is one of those lessons for anybody in every field: you need to network. As soon as I made up my mind I wanted to find someplace else, I called a few friends, and within a month I had an interview at a place in Oklahoma, small museum that was in the middle of a $10 million reinstallation and expansion. It's the Cherokee Strip Regional Heritage Center, if you look that one up. I got down there, I got to be the jack of all trades. I was the curator, but I was also the IT guy. I was also the exhibits guy. I was also the collections manager. I was also the registrar. I mean, the list goes on. And so I realized, as part of that, I was making positive change in that museum every day, by helping them turn from a non-professional small museum, like kind of jokingly in my head refer to as a Podunk County Historical Society, into a professional museum. I was the first museum professional to be employed at that location as a regular staff member. We had one of the directors who preceded the time that I was there. She was amazing. She's currently teaching at University of Central Oklahoma. If you're looking for museum education, that's a great place to go. But I learned during that time frame how much I enjoyed building a new museum, or like really was rebuilding a museum at that point. It was kind of like we're building it from scratch, trying to make a good, solid, professional museum. And when that project was done, within a couple of years, I started to kind of feel like I needed to find another challenge. And one day I got 3 emails from 3 people saying, you need to take a look at this. And it was the Marshals Museum. That was just over 6 years ago when I applied, was accepted, and started working here. When I showed up, we were in 6 or 7 people in a small office downtown. We now have an 8-person staff working in a 53,000 square foot building. I have the largest office in the building. My desk is right over there, but all the stuff I care about is behind me and along this wall. And I could not be happier. We are fully expecting that we're going to be opening to the public towards the end of this next year. Just before I got on this call with Kristy, I was on a Google Meet with our production team in California, talking to them about changes that we're making to keep everything updated with what's going on. And we are just so excited. And here I get to be in charge of about 2,000 objects behind me and on the table over here. And a third of that's on loan to us from the Marshals Service. We talk about the entire 230-year history of the agency. A lot of people don't realize it goes back all the way to George Washington, not John Wayne. And it goes all the way to today. Is one of my favorite people in the world has said, because one of the things the Marshals do is they have, for their entire history, operated the nation's federal courts. If the courts aren't running, the country's not running. And I couldn't be more excited to be here and tell this story.
That's awesome. And I think we are running a very similar path with EMS. We have almost 300 years of history from the Napoleonic Wars onwards, Revolutionary War at the start of our country onto today. And without EMS, we don't have healthy communities. So
I know.
We definitely need to have the support behind both of our industries.
Yeah. And I mean, and it's just the stories that we're telling, the stories that you guys are telling it's just like there's a big Venn diagram. There's a huge chunk of overlap. I mean, just even like when we think about our personal lives, how much it's much more obvious when we interact with EMS. It's a little bit less obvious when people interact with Marshal Service or things that touch onto that sphere. But yeah, it's a really important story, and it's like all stories, they need to be told.
Yeah, absolutely. Speaking of which, do you have a favorite story or artifact from your collection?
My single favorite artifact in the collection, and I have to be kind of careful with this. And that's one of the reasons why some people might have noticed I've got the gloves on. I don't like wearing cotton gloves around the collection, simply because some things don't hold well within cotton. And then when you're dealing with paper materials, it's either going to be nitrile gloves or bare skin. But this particular document, to me, sums up the Marshals Service more than anything else. It's a 3-page document. I'm not going to force you guys to get a look at it, but that piece of paper is a federal court order that was in the breast pocket of a deputy US Marshal who was in New Orleans. Let me see here. It would now be 61 years ago this last week. He was in New Orleans helping to escort 3 young girls upstairs into a school that they were integrating. The integration of schools in New Orleans, and then later on, about that same time frame, Ole Miss and other universities, deputy US Marshals were the ones who were executing the federal court orders saying that these people need to be able to take part in their civil rights. And in this particular case, this deputy had this piece of paper in his breast pocket as he walked up those steps. Why that means so much to me, partially, is, yes, obviously the Marshal's job of executing federal court orders, but that particular deputy, when he showed up, like a number of other deputies at that time, he did not support integration. He was a segregationist. This particular deputy was from the Eastern District of Arkansas, but he was not alone in the Marshals Service, much less the country, in wanting to not integrate. But the reason why he was there was because the court said you need to be here to do this because this is your job. And as one of the other deputies on the detail said, you put on the badge, you do the job. And that's essentially saying, regardless of whether or not I believe or support this, this is what I have to do because the federal court says I have to do this. And by the time that they were all done with that detail, every last one of those deputies, their minds and their hearts had been changed. And to me, that's the perfect example of somebody who didn't agree with, didn't want to be in that location at that time doing that job. But that's what he did because as a US Marshal, that's what he had to do. He had to go in, support the Constitution, support the Judiciary Act of 1789, support the federal court orders that were coming down. And that right there, it's a piece of paper. And as I know a gun guy, a lot of people just kind of, it's like, yeah, he's like, where's your favorite gun? It's like, well, I've got a couple of favorite guns back here, but favorite object in the collection, that's it, hands down.
Yeah, that's awesome. For everyone out there, I pulled one of mine too. I have too many. I can't narrow it down to one. But this was recently donated to us. So this is an emergency from the TV show Emergency, as I'm sure most of you are familiar with. The emergency board game. So not only for me, not only does this reflect a really fun, unique snapshot in EMS history and kind of the birth of EMS as we know it now with Johnny and Roy and Engine 51, but it also allowed kids to get involved with EMS. So it's not just the guys going out riding on trucks, but now kids and families can explore a bit about fire and medical response and really start connecting some of those dots at an early age, which is really what I love about museums.
And I know I'm dating myself, but I remember watching it as a kid, and it was like, to me, it was a TV show. It wasn't until it was on like Netflix or Amazon Prime or something, sometime it was a few years ago, I sat down, I started watching it, and all of a sudden I realized the story it was telling about the founding of that first EMS, the Los Angeles EMS service. And I was just like, it blew my mind that it wasn't until then.
Yeah.
That's
different layers of stories, right? That's, it's a good TV show when the kids can enjoy it and the grown-ups can enjoy it. So
and the historians.
Yes, absolutely. A fan of all things emergency. We have some other great stuff, and we'll have to do like quarterly check-in collections or something, see what we can find. That is awesome. I love that story, and I think that fits well for EMS as well. You put on the uniform, you put on the badge, you go out and perform duties, and there's a time and a place to debrief from that and to recover from your experience, but ultimately the uniform defines what you do when you're out in public, and you have to wear that proudly and accordingly.
Yeah, I think that right there, what you just said, just kind of, that ties back to what Al Butler had said about you put on the badge, you do the job. It's as much as marshals have to go out and hit even though you may not want to do this particular thing, you have to do that. That's one of the reasons why EMS, fire, police, everybody has had my respect for years, is just knowing that these people are going someplace where I would never want to go. I mean, like some of you get a lot of jobs that you're just like, really, you guys called me here for that. But there's a lot of times, like there are some stories I could tell just within the last week of something that happened here that you don't want to have to deal with. So and I feel honored that I'm in a unique position, and I don't know how you feel, that we're able to hear those stories, that we're allowed to sit across the table from somebody who went to a place I'm not brave enough to go to, and share that story and trust us with the information to share that for future generations. We did a big 9/11 project, and it was moving and absolutely incredible to hear the stories of the responders. We just did a 20th anniversary. That was as Kristy had mentioned earlier, we're not yet open. We're not fully open to the public, and we're going to be open this about a year from now. But regardless, we wanted to, like you just mentioned 9/11, we wanted to make sure that we recognized the 20th anniversary of 9/11, because a lot of people don't realize the Marshals' involvement in 9/11, whether it was there on the ground that day, or you have within that day and the days that followed, deputies across the country making sure that the courts are open, making sure that the federal court process continues to happen. You had the JPATS, what a lot of people think of as Con Air. You had the JPATS flights over those first couple of days, transporting Border Patrol agents to airports up on the Eastern Seaboard to help secure them, transporting Verizon technicians and equipment from Florida and other parts of the country to New York so they can activate cell towers so people can have communications just to get their jobs done at ground zero. And then Marshals taking over airports. You've got a lot of other stuff, but one of the things that we had there, I mean, it boggles my mind, just the stuff that I have seen, the people I've talked to, the stories I've had. If you go to our YouTube channel, you can see a video that it's just over an hour long that are photographs taken by Marshal Service employees never seen before that are on this video, as well as about a dozen interviews, mostly Marshal Service employees who were working that day, talking about their just their experiences on that day and the days, and weeks and months that followed. And so, I mean, just again, it's like we're talking about wearing other hats. We have 8 people here. I'm also the audio video guy, so I was the one putting that video together. But as part of our exhibits, we wanted to make sure we had that exhibit. So even with us not being open, we found sponsors. We opened up for the month of September a month-long free exhibit specifically on that subject. We had about 25 photographs blown up to 4 feet by however many feet. And we had some objects related to that, including this piece of steel from the World Trade Center.
Wow.
We have one piece of steel that's part of an I-beam. It's permanently on exhibit in our Hall of Honor, recognizing line of duty deaths. We have this second piece of steel. We received that one from the Southern District of New York, who received it from the Fire Department of New York. And that piece we're able to use, since it's smaller, we can use it around the building, use it elsewhere. But I mean, again, storytelling, trying to let people understand it. And this and the other piece of steel we have are 2 things near and dear to my heart, because of everything in our collection, they're the only 2 things in the building I let people touch with their bare hands.
Yeah, that's cool.
So
very cool.
it's I mean, we really get, and it all comes back down to storytelling. Also 9/11, this helmet was worn by a deputy who was at ground zero. It still has the 9/11 dust, the World Trade Center dust on the inside that he didn't clean out. It's my boss, Patrick, which I wouldn't be surprised if at some point Patrick ends up on here. My boss, Patrick, one of my favorite quotes from him that I started to pick up, because as a curator, you love all of this stuff. All of this stuff is important. But once you go on the other side of the wall to where the experience space is going to be at, you have to start being more of an editor. You have to start picking and choosing. And from Patrick, I learned old stuff's not important. Important stuff is important. Important stuff is important because there is a story attached to it. And if there's not a story, why is it going to be out there on the floor? It's like watching a motion picture, going to the movies. Now that some of us are able to go to the movies again, but just anytime you watch television or a movie, a good editor will always sit there and ask themselves, okay, this particular scene here, does this move the plot? And as museum people, as whether we're doing exhibits, whether we're doing just anything that we're doing to the public sphere, we're telling stories. And does this move the plot? Does this helmet move the plot? Does one of the firearms back over here move the plot? I mean, what does this help people learn? Is it just, wow, they got a bunch of guns? Or, oh, this gun was at this event, or that gun was at that event, or just they changed from this to this because of this reason. There's
Mhm.
lessons behind everything. And
Absolutely.
I start to ramble if you don't stop me. So.
As do I, and I sit with bated breath. Um, so we both work with first responders, law enforcement. Do you see a place for the museum in supporting those industries directly?
Oh yeah, definitely. Dealing with first responders and law enforcement, I mean, the Marshal Service on a daily basis across the nation, all 94 districts, works hand in hand with local law enforcement and first responders. Whether it is just doing their own work, or if it's specifically working with the different task forces around the country. Most of the 94 districts have their own task force, which is built of Marshal Service, and then members from city, county, state, maybe other federal law enforcement. And they go out sometimes to get federal fugitive warrants taken care of. Sometimes they are helping to support the local law enforcement, or like city, county, state, federal, to execute warrants that they don't have the capability of, whether it's because it's somebody dangerous, that like somebody out in the county that county can't support that, or it's a flight risk, or it's just we need more bodies. And so they go out and they help. And every time they do that, they're working with city, county, state, federal. They're working with local EMS. They might have fire on the line, depending on what's going on, what the expectations are. And one of my favorite things, and I know that at some point we're going to have an exhibit about this, is everybody who goes on the Marshal Service task forces is part of one of those groups. They're all trained up in something that the Marshals started doing, instituted within their own agency, I think most of 20 years ago, involving the use of tourniquets. Every deputy marshal who goes out with their gear, if they have their tactical gear, they've got a tourniquet with them, because the Marshal Service figured out a long time ago that you can you can put a tourniquet on yourself and take care of yourself until help arrives. And if you are a deputy and somebody else goes down, they've been gunshot, especially if it's a gunshot or a bad knife wound in one of the extremities, the arms or leg, you can very easily take care of that. If they're conscious, they can take care of it themselves. And that's one of the things they do, is every one of the task forces around the country, they have to learn how to use, they go through their tourniquet program. So there have been first responders across the country whose lives have been saved as a result of this tourniquet program. I'm going to do an exhibit at some point about first aid, about EMS, and part of that is going to be the tourniquet program and how they've expanded that across other law enforcement agencies. And I mean,
That's
it's just
awesome.
like, it's a little small, simple thing. And you can buy these online, the little tourniquet kits that can go on to web gear or onto your the people's packs and vests. And I mean, it's just this small little thing, but how many lives has it saved? And I mean, that's really, I know as much as we try sometimes not to think about the numbers, but all of these fields, what we're really doing is we're saving lives.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's a good suggestion to anybody watching. Look up your local first aid class, your Stop the Bleed class.
Definitely.
If you learn how to do CPR and you know how to stop the bleed, you are going to save lives over the course of your life. It's always good to be prepared for that. And absolutely, local Red Cross, local community colleges offer those classes. And that's when every scout, every teacher, every student should learn how to do.
And along those lines, every museum I've worked at has offered those classes, and especially to anybody who encounters the public first person should, if you're in the museum field, you should have a first aid and CPR certification, usually with the AED. And if you have a facility that sees visitors and you don't have an AED, whether you're talking about for the people who visit or the people who are working there, I mean, it's just like there's not really an age limit on whether or not you're going to need the use of CPR or an AED.
Right. Yes. Make sure your AED works. Make sure your smoke detectors work.
I mean, there's
Public service announcement from
yeah.
Kristy and
All of a
David.
sudden, we've just started turning into a Saturday morning public service announcement.
Yeah. That's what we do as museums. We educate, we get the public involved.
Yes.
How do you guys support any education or any training with the marshals, or do the marshals bring in educational opportunities to the public? Is there partnerships there that you're working out?
Well, as I mentioned, I'm here in this building that has been here since we moved in January 2020, right before the Great Unpleasantness, and we prior to that, and even still continuing today, we touch at least 20 other states with our educational programming. For a number of years, the Marshals Museum has produced materials for teachers. And if there's somebody here who's watching this who knows a teacher, by all means, contact us. And Leslie Higgins, our education director, she would be more than happy to talk to you, help provide you with some educational materials. You can find some of these downloaded. You can download these from our webpage. We talk specifically typically about the Constitution and the rule of law, about the history of the Marshals Service, which again is the Marshals history is American history. American history is Marshals history. 1789 to the present, any major event which has happened in the history of the country, the Marshals have been involved in some way, shape, or form. And as we have gone through that, especially now that we have a building, it's much nicer because we can have local programming in our own house rather than having to find some place to go out and rent a hall. But we are talking already with the Marshals Service, and there's a number of people in the Marshals Service who would love to see us as a regional, if not national, location for some of their training. Granted, we won't be the formal training, like entry training. That's going to continue right now at the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center in Georgia. But for training that happens later on, regional and national meetings that might take place, we're here for them. And we are going to be some of us kind of joke about, well, we aren't marshals, but we get to tell their story. Yeah. And so we get to tell the story that's much deeper and much broader than a lot of the people who typically walk onto the job. It's like your job as EMS. There's so many people out there who are in fire trucks, ambulances, squad cars, who have no idea what your story tells or how far back this history goes.
Absolutely. And we're out to change that. We'll make sure everybody knows that EMS history is well beyond 1966, despite the white paper in 1966.
It's a dawn. I mean, it's like for all of us, it's a daunting responsibility knowing that we're being trusted with this story, that we're being trusted with trying to educate others about this, yeah, and helping them to understand.
Yeah, it really is an honor. We did get a question on Facebook, so if anybody else has questions, throw them on the Facebook live stream right now. But one of my volunteers, Clark, excellent volunteer. He's wondering if you know, how is the inclusion of tactical paramedics influencing the deployment of marshals in the field? Do you have any sense?
I know a little bit about this. Again, as I said earlier, I'm not a marshal. We are not the Marshals Service. We get to tell their stories. Right. But almost like within the Marshals Service, there is a core group of people across the agency. And I very specifically say people because is very much men and women across the agency who are part of Special Operations Group. Special Operations Group are like best of the best. They have a special separate training that they go through once they qualify and are selected for SOG. If there is a high profile target, if there's a dangerous fugitive that they have to go after, if there is some particular mission, like if there is like the El Chapo trial that was going on after the second time that El Chapo was picked up, he gets transported to New York, they start running the trial. SOG was on site because of the training that they receive and how they do their jobs. SOG, most of those guys have been trained in a variety of first aid methods, like EMS methods. In a lot of ways, I would almost think of as combat medic level, because many of these guys, many of the men and women who are doing this currently have some military background. They're going into quite often what ends up being almost a military style raid. But when you're thinking about how they go into buildings, how they take down the fugitives they're after, but even in communities where they don't have SOG being part of that job, they quite often will have some member of that task force, some member of the local office across the country. It's like here, we're in the Western District of Arkansas. You go to Little Rock, Eastern District of Arkansas, you go to Muskogee, Oklahoma, or Eastern District of Oklahoma. Each of those offices, regardless of the size, will probably have somebody who's trained in some level of first aid akin to what a lot of the first responders get. And if they don't have somebody that's fully capable of that, especially if they're going out on a fugitive warrant, if they're executing a warrant, they're probably going to have somebody, they will have an ambulance there that's right on the scene, who that person may not be wearing tactical gear coming in with the team as they come in, but they're going to be right there waiting to go in, waiting to help, because it's unfortunate how often on these jobs that people end up needing that medical assistance. But whether it's for either the member of the team that's going in or the fugitive they're going after, just based on the decisions that people make. But it's one of those things that some people don't understand is with the Marshal Service, the job that they have is not only to protect you and I and the people around the court, but their job is to get their hands on that fugitive. And then once their hands are safely on that fugitive, once their hands are on that fugitive, they are to keep that person safe until they are taken care of however the court sees fit. And so if you ever see in a federal court case, if you're sitting in, if it's a criminal court case, you're sitting in the courtroom, you'll see a deputy behind that defendant. They're there not just to protect everybody else in the courtroom, they're there to defend that defendant from somebody who might want to come over the rail. So it's a job, it's a very, very difficult job. And but all parts of it come back down to making sure that that person is safe, whether or not their job is not to figure out the punishment or whether they're innocent or guilty. Their job is to get that person from point A to point B to point C.
Yeah, and on top of that, I would just say that I've had the pleasure of speaking with a few marshals over the last couple of years as they pursue paramedic training as additional qualifications so that they can be the tactical, not officially, but they can be a tactical medic within their district, within their team. So yeah, there's definitely that option too. And then you get your EMS training, your EMS support through normal channels that other paramedics do on the civilian side. So very cool. We have one more question, and this might be a Patrick question, so we can pass it off to him and we'll get him on another day.
If I can't answer it, I'll let you know.
Yeah, I also know who's asking this and why. But how is the museum funded? How have you managed to create this excellent? And if you haven't checked out the website yet, check out the US Marshals Museum website. They have a great rendering and photos of their building. It is spectacular. It is a gorgeous place.
Well, thank you. And this is a question I can answer.
Okay, excellent.
Fort Smith was chosen as, after a national selection, Fort Smith was chosen as the home of the Marshals Museum in 2007, after, as I said, after a national search. Within a couple of years, they moved from being a city-sponsored museum to starting up nonprofits, a 501c3 in the United States. And so those nonprofits started fundraising, they started planning. There's two specific nonprofits, one for the funding and the fundraising, one for the building design and the operation. So I work for the United States Marshals Museum. There's two people in the building who work for the United States Marshals the Marshals Museum Foundation. And so, yeah, we get into a little bit of a word salad sometimes. the funding behind this has been almost entirely private donations. There was a small amount of money that was given from the state of Arkansas most of about 8 years ago. This is a $50 million project, land included. And so the building I'm sitting in is a $19 million building as it was built. And as we moved into it nearly 2 years ago, we've since found out that if we held off until today to start building the building, because we do get that question about like, well, why didn't you start building the building when you could build all the exhibits? If we'd have held off till now, that $19 million with the cost of construction and materials that have gone up since then would have probably gone up by about 50%. At which point we'd have another $10 million that we'd have to raise. So we are in the last throes of fundraising as we are getting very close towards the end, but we have the money either in hand or pledged to build out our museum experience. And so that's one of the things we're going. I was telling Kristy earlier, I just got off of a phone call with a number of folks in California earlier this evening to talk to them about where we are in our production. And so we're looking at opening up to the general public about this time next year.
Yeah, and you guys and gals may have noticed that Dave is using the word experience a lot. Both he and I, and probably a good chunk of the museum professionals out there, really believe that museums are places to experience. They're not just savings banks for the old stuff, but really it's the stories and it's experiencing history and engaging past, present, and future, really molding that into a quality experience that elicits all five senses is what a museum is about.
Exactly. I don't want to fault the museums that have what we affectionately refer to as dead stuff under glass, simply because that was how you made museums at the time. But quite often that's what they had the funding to do. And there's a lot of just some amazing museums with amazing collections telling amazing stories out there that if they had the funding, they would be able to tell their stories in a more engaging manner. But that is exactly what Kristy was saying. Our museum experience, you're looking at the cases with the objects, you're looking at video screens telling stories, you're looking at hands-on activities that help you to better understand the mechanics of some object or the mechanics of some event or happening. We are looking at every way that we can in our own designs. You're going from one room where you're learning about the hardships of being a deputy in the frontier, and you've got cold air blowing in from what looks like a snowstorm outside. And then you go through another space and you go into another room where you're supposed to be in the middle of an Oklahoma summer as a deputy in Indian territories. And in that room, all of a sudden, you've just gone from 60 degrees to 70 degrees to 70, even 70 to 75 degrees. You're going to feel a lot warmer. And so as you start to go through here, you're going to feel difference. You're going to feel something, but it's back to that whole thing. It's an experience anymore. It's not just an exhibit.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't see any more questions. So thank you guys for dropping that. If you have any more, we'll kind of keep an eye on the Facebook stream once it kind of relaunches in syndication, if you will. We'll pop it onto our YouTube channel as well. So feel free to post comments in YouTube and we'll get back to you. Before I let you go tonight, do you have, as a curator, one tip or trick you wish the public knew to take care of their artifacts before they sent them to you or their grandkids sent them to you?
Well, okay, we don't want typewriters or pianos or pump organs. No, that's because every museum I've ever worked at has to turn those down. No, the biggest trick is probably for those people who have old black and white photographs that are old and are curling up and are kind of wrinkled and crackled and just not in a good way. And you can't figure out what to do with them because like if you try to fold them out straight, they're going to break. Is you go get a Sterlite container that, or Rubbermaid, or however you want to think. You can go pick these up for a couple bucks at Walmart. Get yourself a rack, a wire rack that has legs of some sort that'll lift it up more than an inch off of the bottom. And then you take about a cup of water, pour that into the bottom of the container, put the rack down, and then carefully lay out your photographs on top of that rack. Close the cover, set it there, just kitchen counter, closet, wherever you want to, someplace it won't get knocked around for a day or two. Bring it back out, take those photographs very carefully. You can stretch them out, set them between, in a perfect world, a couple pieces of non-buffered tissue paper that you can get at a craft store. In a non-perfect world, you can take some decent paper towels, both sides of them, nice big heavy book on top of a flat surface, and that'll flatten them out, let them sit there for a couple, 3 days while they dry out, and they'll be nice and flat, and you'll be in a perfect world. I've lost track of how many times I have had to go through that process with materials that have come into the collection.
And my favorite tip or trick to anybody out there, if you have stuff, keep it out of direct sunlight, because the fading that happens with direct sunlight is the bane of our existence.
Especially paper materials. Paper materials and textiles, but even metal materials. I'm a gun guy from way back. I had a collection I was working with. There was a color, and people who don't know guns won't need to know this, but color case hardened Sharps carbine that was just beautiful on the side that was away from the sun. All this really beautiful color that was all flowing through each other, the way that the metal's treated. Other side of it was just steel gray.
Yeah.
Because for about a 30-year period, it was in a window, and that gray side was the ultraviolet light that was just attacking it on a daily basis.
Yeah, yeah. So if you don't have even sheer curtains, Home Depot, Lowe's, this is not a sponsorship, your local hardware store has UV film. You could even put that on frames to protect your prints. So if anything's of value to you, your family, keep it safe from the sunlight.
That one's a huge one.
Yeah, yeah. And pencils are your friends. You can
Pencils
write
are your friend. Details
on the back of photographs with pencils, and then we're not guessing 20 years later who people are.
It's always one of the worst case scenarios when you've got an old photograph that all you know is, like, in my line of work, here's like half a dozen old Marshalls, and you don't even have a year. You don't know a left to right, the first row, left to right, the second row. All you know is here's 4 old Marshalls. And I don't know where they're from. I don't know what year this was taken. I don't know who they are. Yeah. Pencils,
protect from the sun, Rubbermaid containers. There you go. Your quick curatorial lesson here on Friday night. If anybody wants to reach out to you, David, how do people get a hold of the US Marshals Museum?
The best ways to get hold of the US Marshals Museum, you can either come here on Facebook, search for US Marshals Museum, and you can follow us on Facebook. That's a real easy way to find out what programs we have going on. First Monday of December, we have a lecture. It's the final lecture in our, if you're in the Fort Smith area, the final lecture in our series on the 20th anniversary of 9/11. All of these will eventually be up on our YouTube channel. Also, you can go to our webpage, usmmuseum.org. usmmuseum.org. That's 2 M's together in the middle of that. That's for US Marshals Museum. We have a ton of downloadable content on there. Our educational stuff is on there. If you know somebody who's a teacher, there's lots of stuff about civics. And that's really kind of one of the strengths that we see us as having, is being able to tell and teach some of these things that a lot of people recognize that we are currently lacking in our society. And as much as people say, well, they don't teach it in the schools anymore, it's like, well, they always have taught it in the schools. You just weren't paying any attention. So
you need that experience. You need the
yeah.
museum experience.
Yeah, so we get to help teach a lot of that stuff, but Facebook and our webpage are the two easiest, best ways to get hold of us. And if you ever have a question for the museum, for myself, for anybody else here, you can go ahead and jump on there, ask a question, and one of us will pick that up and we'll get to the right person.
Awesome, awesome. And of course, you can visit us at emsmuseum.org. Our September 11th exhibit is extended at the Atlanta History Center until December 31st. So if you're in the Atlanta area, please stop by, give the Atlanta History Center some love, and check out Responding Heroes, the story of 9/11 there. And please support your local museums, preferably this one, but if you want to support the US Marshals Museum too, that would be great. Every museum is dependent on membership and private donations, and we can't thank you enough, especially as the end of the year comes, to support. Please, please support your museums. Any final words?
Well, thank you very much, Kristy, for having me on here. I had a good time. As you know, I used to run a weekly Facebook Live, and I understand what it is to the production to put it on. So I appreciate your taking the time to have me on here as a guest, and I would be more than happy to come back on whenever you want.
Awesome. And vice versa. Thank you so much for spending your Friday night with us. Everybody else, we're back December 3rd with Dr. Walt Stoy, a name you are all familiar with. So be sure to tune in to the same channel December 3rd. And that's just a couple weeks away. Have a fantastic Thanksgiving, everybody. Thank you. Stay safe, stay healthy, enjoy some turkey or tofurkey, whatever your preference is. And we'll catch you all in December. Thank you. Have a great weekend.